Abner Mares is a world champion boxer, Olympian, sports commentator, and most importantly, dad to two little girls. Beloved by abuelas and hardcore fans alike, Abner is a pro at entertaining the world both in and out of the ring. On Blue Wire's new podcast, On the Hook with Abner Mares, we'll hear from Abner, his family, fellow athletes, and other people who made him the boxer and the man he is today. They chat about topics like the state of boxing, Abner's journey from a kid on the streets to boxing champion, sports, music, culture, family life, and so much more. Listen to On the Hook with Abner Mares wherever you get your podcasts. Episodes in English are out on Tuesdays, and episodes in Spanish are out on Wednesdays. What is crack-a-lackin' Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale, coming at you without my co-host Adam Frommel, but we are pleased, or I am pleased, as usual, to be joined by longtime colleague slash friend slash reoccurring guest slash also longtime friend of this podcast, Bleacher Report's Grant Hughes. As always, remember to follow him on Twitter at GT_Hughes. Grant, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well under the circumstances, Dan. I'm glad to talk with you again. I think it's I don't know how long it's been, but I always enjoy these, so I'm excited to get to it.
I've been bothering you more frequently lately, so it's definitely not as long as it's been as it has been in the past. So there's that. We are in off-season mode now, though, although I guess we were there at one point. Like, this is the second off-season. Like, it's kind of weird. Like, it's the off-season, but we also already had the off-season a little bit. And stuff's going to start ramping up. Like, we have the draft. We don't have a scheduled date for free agency, but we know it's going to happen by December 1st. And I love the off-season stuff, but this off-season specifically, and I have to stop myself from saying summer because it's almost freaking November at this point. I'm like, I don't know what the word is, confused, or I have zero expectations just because I don't know what is going to happen. Just with we figure the salary cap's going to be lateral, but like, how does that impact team spending? And what are they going to do with the luxury tax? Does that mean there's going to be more movement? Less movement, more trades, fewer trades? I just have no idea what to expect, and so in a way, I'm kind of looking forward to it.
I agree. I think, first of all, what did we even talk about during the hiatus? Because it felt like there was just did we only talk about the off season from like March to July when? Well, like you and I
did a podcast called "Fuck the Goat Debate." So like
that's right.
We did talk about something like that.
Well, then I guess we should be but for this off season, I'm glad you said that, because I think, like, it seems like generally going into an off season, there'll be a prevailing conventional wisdom, I guess, of, oh, this is a good free agent class, or there's X number of high end free agents, or this is a bad free agent class, or, we have sort of a narrative for it, I think, generally. And this one is just kind of like, I don't think anybody really knows. I mean, other than we all agree the draft is confusing and there's not a superstar in it maybe, and then free agency is a little barren, and especially compared to 21. But I think there's so many like overarching uncertainties with, like, will teams, what are teams' financial situations, and how does that affect whether they'll even use the MLE? So all these guys we think, well, that's an MLE guy, or that, he's a taxpayer MLE guy. Are teams even going to use that because of the tax ramifications, and they have less revenue? There's just a bunch of sort of unknowns. And so I think that makes this kind of weirdly one of the more interesting off seasons I can remember, just because it seems kind of, I don't know, unpredictable, I guess is the word I'd use.
Yeah. And look, you like sort of alluded to this too, but when you're looking at whether teams are going to use the MLE or not, the fact that you probably have, I would say, between 20 to 22 teams that are going to have the same level of spending power in the non-taxpayer MLE, and that there's just not a lot of cap space out there. There are going to be guys invariably who sign for much less than we expect. Is that going to invite shorter contracts because they want to get back to free agency quicker? Or are you actually going to be worried about how the coronavirus pandemic really impacts the long-term revenue of this league? And you're like, you know what, let me just lock down my money now, whatever I could get, because 2021 seems like it's going to be better. 2022 seems like it's going to be better. But unless I'm Anthony Davis, is it actually going to be better?
Yeah, no, I think you hit on one key thing, is that there's going to be a lot of like incredible value short-term contracts signed I was going to say this summer, because I can't stop doing that either, this off season. Just because, like, there's a finite number of mid-level exceptions that are out there, and that number may be much smaller than we think. And so, if you're a player that is obviously worth the MLE in a normal year, suddenly those are just going to kind of get, taken up, and you might be an MLE player that has to settle for the biannual or the taxpayer, or I don't know, minimum even, and maybe an extreme case. It's just there's going to be some big winners, and my guess would be that it's teams that are ready to contend right now, because all things being equal, you're probably going to want to take your mid-level or whatever from a team that has a decent sized role for you and is going to win a bunch of games. But I don't know. That's just kind of my gut.
Yeah, I mean the last thing I'll say this is like the progression I've had is wondering like how much more than the mid-level Paul Millsap is going to get, to thinking like, is he going to end up signing for the biannual? Like not even the mini MLE at this point, but the biannual. So I, like you said, it's just going to be wild and interesting. So speaking of that word, we're going to get to what our most interesting teams are for the offseason. We selected them blindly, so there might be overlap, but we each have pivots. We each selected 5. There might be some quick hitters if we have a ton of overlap. Before we get to them, though, I wanted to ask about Zach Lowe had said on his podcast with Bill Simmons that to keep an eye on the Milwaukee Bucks and the Victor Oladipo sweepstakes. And I've kind of been operating under the assumption that the Pacers won't trade Oladipo just because I feel like I feel like he's not worth that much right now, and you have a better chance of rehabilitating his value leading into the trade deadline. At the same time, I'm sort of curious like how you feel about a potential Bucks play going after that type of player, because if you can buy like low on someone of his caliber, it seems to make sense for the Bucks. Then again, at the same time, like you're probably looking at giving up Dante DiVincenzo, at least one future first round pick, in addition to Eric Bledsoe. And I'd assume that unless Indiana really likes him, that he's probably going somewhere else. And like maybe Atlanta's willing to give up like a low end first to send to Indiana for someone like him to take him into their cap space. And that's why he's more accessible than a Jrue Holiday. But knowing what's kind of happened with Oladipo over the past 2 years, if you're the Bucks, like, is that the guy? Like, I know you're under pressure because of Giannis's upcoming free agency, and you want to know whether he's going to sign the Supermax or not. And then if he doesn't, you have a whole year of speculation. But is Oladipo the guy to unload your asset clip, which relative to other teams is not very deep? But like, we're still talking about if you have to give up a distant first round pick that could, go past the Giannis years with you, like that's obviously not nothing. And so I find myself like I'm basically morbidly curious about the Oladipo to Milwaukee chatter.
So a couple things. I think that for the reasons you mentioned about not wanting to give up, firsts way down the line, or really just potentially post Giannis, in addition to just not having a bunch of like Bledsoe's the salary that's just got to go in any how do we make the Bucks better, right, transaction. And like I just don't know who is going to say to themselves, who really makes us significantly better is Eric Bledsoe. Like that's just not, he's a fine player, but it's just not that enticing. But as to Oladipo specifically, I'm not sure. He's not the guy. But I think he's a guy, and he might be among the best guys that the Bucks can realistically hope to get with what they have. But it's sort of like which version of Oladipo. If it's like 17-18 Oladipo, we're not even having this conversation, obviously, because he's not on the table and the Pacers have already extended him, or, they'll do that at their earliest opportunity. But he does kind of make some sense, right? Like he I think if healthy is on Bledsoe's level defensively, he might be even more useful because he's a little longer. I think he seems duplicative because when he was really good with Indiana a couple of years ago, he was just kind of like, well, he has the ball in the middle of the floor 30 feet from the basket and can just beat his guy downhill, which is what Giannis does in their system. So I'm not sure how that works, but he can run a pick and roll. His per play efficiency was really good in the 80-something percentile as a ball handler a couple of years ago in his kind of breakout season. Spot up shooting is fine, which you're going to need on the Bucks, 39%, I think, in 17-18. But what percentage of that guy is he? I don't know. But if you're telling me I'm rolling the dice on Oladipo, who might not be any good anymore and probably will just be gone after this year, I'm kind of more interested in that than Bledsoe and DiVincenzo, honestly, because they are under pressure. The Bucks are, and Oladipo, even if he isn't what, he could be, even if he falls short of that. I think the other thing you look at is you can go to Giannis and say like, "Hey, we got you an all-star. Like this guy, this was the best we could do." And I do think there's value in that. But yeah, I don't know if he's the guy, I guess, but I just don't know. Like, is there someone? Who's your guy? Like, if you are the Bucks and it's not Oladipo, is there someone out there that just is like, well, this is the fix. This is what is going to get us what we need.
If we're trying to keep it semi-realistic, because you could say Bradley Beal easily, but I don't think the path to them getting better would be to give up Chris Middleton in any trade, just on
Mm-hmm.
balance for them. I
Mm-hmm.
think it would be Jrue Holiday. And I don't know if using Bledsoe, let's say the 24 pick, and then DiVincenzo, like, does that get it done? And like the asset that I keep coming back to is their 2024 first round pick. And I've had this conversation with a bunch of people, probably including you. There are certain teams where it feels like these distant first round picks are so valuable, and yet I don't know that front offices think in those terms because they look at it as, well, we might not be the people using that pick. And so how in a vacuum, a 2024 Bucks pick, if it's loosely protected, knowing that could be post Giannis, hyper valuable. But if you're a
Yeah.
front office, can you guarantee you're going to be in place 4 drafts from now? I don't. Maybe Kevin Pritchard in Indiana believes that he will be. But aside from like that type of situation, I don't know how many front offices would be inclined to really value that for a pick that's not going to convey for so long, unless they think they could immediately flip it. And so I don't know if your package is, and look, there could be third teams involved, but I keep coming back to Atlanta as a spot for Bledsoe, and that's if they don't want to spend their cap space. He just seems like a good fit beside Trae Young. But aside from getting like a real, like, you're not going to get one of their young wings for Bledsoe. Maybe Kevin Herter, but I would still say no there. You might get like a lower end first round pick. They have that OKC lottery protected 2022 pick. Like maybe that's the pick they give up. That's the maximum you're getting for Bledsoe. But just some permutation of Bledsoe this year's first after you use it, obviously, and then Dante DiVincenzo. Is that enough to get you a Jrue Holiday? Is he the guy that gets you over the hump? Is that put you in play for anyone else? Like, I don't even, you could say that a Karis LeVert or Spencer Dinwiddie makes a ton of sense for this team, but that package doesn't make a ton of sense for Brooklyn, a team that's also trying to win now.
Yeah, I think the Bucks are just such a. I mean, I don't envy that position, which is crazy to say about a team that has a two-time MVP. But their paths to getting better just aren't that real. Like, I think I agree that Holiday would be great. Like he might, you ask who the guy, if Oladipo's the guy, Holiday might be the guy. The problem is, I think Holiday is the guy for like 5 other teams at least, and I think that New Orleans actually has a pretty good case to just want to keep him. I know I personally have argued several times. Well, you think about the timeline not matching up, and they're built around Ingram and Zion, and Holiday's 30, and there's just it doesn't make sense. They got to trade him, but like if they do trade him, they're going to have a bunch of suitors. I think basically any team that has bad salary and picks, I think, is just going to be involved. And obviously, Holiday to me is a better value and a better player than Oladipo right now. I think maybe like if the Bucks did get Oladipo, it might be because the market just isn't that great for him, and that's as good as Indiana can do.
Right. And they don't want to wait like to the trade deadline. And look, to the Bucks' credit in that situation, like, he's an expiring contract. And so if you're getting off Bledsoe's money in the process, like, you could just kind of look at it, sell it to Giannis as, not only did we get you a guy who profiles as an all-star if he's healthy, but now we might just have some flexibility moving forward, even if we don't have the assets. The only other name that I can really think of for them would be, they seem like a team where Zach LaVine would be perfect. Like, just helicopter him into that number 3 spot. You could have him like cut, you could have him catch and shoot jumpers, but he also gives you that extra layer of postseason shot creation, because those are the shots that he's making with the Bulls almost exclusively right now.
Yeah, and if you can hide, you need to hide him defensively too. And I think the Bucks are about as good a place as anywhere to do that. I keep coming back to, I think for me, what I hope is that the Bucks don't play offense the same way going forward. And that to me means you need a guy who's going to be like a primary pick and roll ball handler that is, orders of magnitude better at it than Bledsoe. And is a threat to, shoot when guys go under or don't stay glued, coming over the top. The problem is like, man, that guy's hard to find because everybody wants that guy because that is like your number one option on most good NBA offenses. But because if you just kind of slot in like another, not I think Levine is a fine option, but he's not gonna turn Giannis into a permanent the best role man in the league, which I think he has the potential to be. Which is probably to me how the Bucks should play. This is me, by the way, saying I know more about how Milwaukee should play than Mike Budenholzer, which is ridiculous. But, but just as a spectator, that's what I want. And I think that again, the Bucks were not one of my most interesting teams or one that I intended to talk about. But but like if they were able to get a guy that could sort of revamp how they play, Chris Paul is obviously someone that got mentioned initially, but it seems like there's no way that would happen. That would make them even more.
Which is bullshit because that seems like a money thing for them. I'm not saying that. I know people have mentioned that they can include George Hill and Brook Lopez in prospective deals. My whole thing is like Chris Paul is really good, but like you don't want to end up trading like 3 to 4 rotation players for him because like that you still come out. Maybe your team's a little bit better, but they're definitely more susceptible to one injury, and so it's. What can you do to sweeten? I call it the poo-poo platter package of Bledsoe, Ilyasova, Lopez, assuming he picks up his player option, and DJ Wilson. Like that's the money you need for Chris Paul. Does it take anything else to get him? Because Bledsoe is on the books for another like 2.5 years since the final year of his contract is only partially guaranteed. I don't know, but like that's the package I would be. You talk about the guy you just described is Chris Paul. What can you attach to that package? Does number 24 do it? Is that too much? Is Dante DiVincenzo too much for you? I don't think either asset would be a deal breaker for me. Both of them together definitely might be for me. Definitely might be. There's a turn of phrase for you. But like that should be with Giannis approaching free agency. These the team governors claiming like we'll pay the tax if we have to, but like you let Malcolm Brogdon go, and I know people thought that was made too much of in the moment, but it's been proven that he wasn't just a luxury for them. And so if you have a chance to get Chris Paul and it's not costing you more than that poo-poo platter package than one like sort of minor asset, I'm not trading my 2024 pick for Chris Paul. I'm doing it. Like, and that should be I think the reporting from The Athletic is saying the Bucks aren't interested in that because of the money. But like you have a chance to add someone who was second team All-NBA last year and who probably only gets better when you project him onto the Eastern Conference. That's absolutely wild to me that it would be something you wouldn't do. But of course, money obviously matters, even though in this case it really shouldn't.
This is a sort of a tangent, but every time, so I've been having a really hard time evaluating what Chris Paul's value is because he did have such a good year and he does sort of seem like a fix for like anyone that needs offensive stewardship and just general like, control. But I don't know if I swear I see packages of, well, it's going to cost you picks to get off of Chris Paul, or no, actually it's going to cost the other team picks because that's what OKC wants. And that's a plausible trade. I don't know what his value is, but what it makes me think all the time is why aren't all the teams that you see linked in rumors to Chris Paul just kicking down the Raptors' door for Kyle Lowry instead? Because that's an expiring deal, and it may just be because Toronto's like, no, he's going to retire here, and then we're going to build a statue. But to me, Lowry might be the guy for the Bucks as I think about it more, because there's a guy like there's your guy who's just going to kind of, when things start to look a little dicey in the second round again next year and the here we go again talk starts, Lowry's the guy that's going to say, no. Like, here's how it's going to go. And he's going to fix it. He shouldn't cost as much as Paul to get just because he's a rental. But again, I admit I don't know what Paul's value should be, but I just think Lowry should be talked about a little more because he kind of fixes everything for almost any team he goes to.
Well, I think the two things there is that he probably does cost you more in my mind because he's quote unquote a rental or at least an expiring contract, where with Chris Paul, it's like you have 2 years and $85.6 million that you have to pay him. And so like to pay him $44.2 million in the final year of that deal, like that's a ton of money. And the other thing here is that Toronto for now, like maybe Lowry becomes the guy for a lot of teams or more gettable if they're not trying to win, but they just came within one victory of the Eastern Conference Finals. And it's like, why would they move him right now? In my mind, he's an expiring contract. He's not harshing their flexibility. They're not going to tank next year, no matter what they're due, or at least I don't think they will. If they end up losing Fred VanVleet, Ibaka, and Gasol in free agency, and they don't want to sign anyone else with resulting cap space or whatever, then yeah, I totally get it. But Chris Paul plays for a team that doesn't seem to be tracking with his timeline anymore, and that plus the extra year, I think, just makes him eminently more available. And then cheaper by extension. And I'm with you. I don't really know what his value is. We've definitely moved past, I believe, that they have to attach something to Chris Paul to get rid of him. And it's also just in hindsight weird that that was ever really a thing, knowing how good he was this year. However, it's like, are they actually going to get even like a semi-good young player or a low-end pick for him when he's owed that much money? Or if they can just get some cheaper contracts, most of them expiring, like that's the package you just pull the trigger on.
Yeah, I just don't know. I don't know. It just made me think of Lowry, and obviously the answer to why isn't Lowry coming up more is because he is really good and a really huge value on that contract still. So that makes, I think you answered my question.
Even though sports had a break, your business didn't. You have to keep moving, and that makes hiring more important than ever. Indeed is here to help. Indeed.com is the #1 job site in the world because Indeed gets you the best people fast. Unlike other sites, Indeed gives you full control and payment flexibility over your hiring. You only pay for what you need, you can pause your account at any time, and there are no long-term contracts. Plus, Indeed provides powerful tools to make your search that much easier, like sponsored jobs, which are shown to be 3.5 times more likely to result in a hire. With 73% of online job seekers visiting Indeed each month, Indeed is going to get you the important hire you need, just like they have for over 3 million businesses. Right now, Indeed is offering our listeners a free $75 credit to boost your job post, which means more quality candidates will see it fast. Try Indeed out with a free $75 credit at Indeed.com/BlueWire. This is their best offer available anywhere. Go right now to Indeed.com/BlueWire. Terms and conditions apply. Offer valid through December 31st.
Talk about a tangent. We can get into our most interesting teams this offseason now. There was no criteria for this. It's just for whatever reason we find them intriguing. And so as the guest extraordinaire, who is your first team?
I think it's pretty predictable because I picked the Warriors, and that's because to me, obviously it's rare to have a theoretical contender picking second in a draft and having all this injury related comeback unknown stuff. They got to fill out a roster. They got these weird. They have the Andrew Wiggins contract. They have that $17.2 million traded player exception. They have Minnesota's top 3 protected 2021 first. They have all these, I don't know what I call them, options, but they've got these tools to really theoretically change the roster. And they're different than most of these other teams because the clock is sort of ticking. Like that TPE goes away, right? They have, use it or lose it. And the draft is another sort of time constraint. Is if you're going to move this number 2 pick, time clock's ticking on that too. So they are the ones I think that have sort of maximum urgency time-wise, and certainly because their core is on the absolute back end, I think, of their primes. So there's urgency there too. So to me, for all the reasons and all the things I just mentioned in kind of a dump it all out at once manner, I think they're my most interesting offseason team, and I have absolutely no idea what they're going to do with any of those tools. There's a million guys they could go after with the TPE. There's a bunch of options with that number 2 pick, whether they use it or not. So they're just kind of fascinating to me. I don't know which way you want to take it. Do you want to do the TPE first and talk about that? Because it is kind of related to that second pick. They're probably going to have to package those.
Right. Or they're going to have to trade the TPE or I say trade the TPE, but take like a James Johnson into the TPE so that they could acquire a more expensive player with James Johnson than they would have with the TPE, which is going to be more stringent. I think so. I'm with you. I have the Warriors on my list too because they have so many moving parts, and the traded player exception is a good place to start because I think these traded player exceptions are normally overvalued because teams don't. Yes, players get sent into traded these TPEs all the time, but like it's part of these like staggered deals where there's like other moving parts. It's very rarely do you just get a good player in it for TPE. Maybe that's the summer where the off season, where this changes because so many teams are hard up after the gate revenue losses, or because they have that second pick. Like it's just such a convenient package. You don't really have to give regard for salary. If you see a player you like, there's the TPE and that pick, and like that's the deal. Or you can turn again the TPE into like an expensive expiring contract and use that as the framework. Like one example would be like number 2 and James Johnson for Aaron Gordon. Like let's say the Warriors get James Johnson for the TPE, or even you can use Gorgui Dieng from Memphis and they send that expiring contract to Orlando with the number 2 pick for Aaron Gordon. People that I've mentioned this to think that that's an overpay for Aaron Gordon, the number 2 pick. So maybe Orlando gives you, what do they have, number 15 in the draft? So maybe they give you that back as well. But like those types of deals, like they seem like they just seem they're more possible now. Like this TPE means something again under the circumstances, but also because the Warriors have that pick to attach.
Right, and I think it's a weird situation, right? Because so I think the smart move, and maybe this is just me being kind of risk averse, is I would want to use that number 2 pick. I know nobody thinks it, and it'd probably be on James Wiseman, who like I can't remember the last prospect that might go second that we knew less about. But like I like the idea of let's get this guy who's maybe a bridge to the next era. We're going to need a center because Nikola Jokic cannot be guarded by Draymond Green in a playoff series the whole time. Kevon Looney can play 20 minutes a night, maybe. So you need a big guy, which is kind of fun to me now. Like the NBA is I guess the big guy's not totally dead if you have Anthony Davis and Jokic and to a much lesser extent Zubac in the same conference that you're trying to get through. But if you do use that number 2 pick, then I don't know why anybody wants anything to do with that TPE. If you use it to get James Johnson, what are you sending to Minnesota for James Johnson or whatever, the expiring salary of your choice? Johnson's one of the best, but are you sending a future second? Or are you like,
something small, if anything, because I think that's like a money saving move.
But who wants to do the Warriors a favor is the other thing.
Well, that's definitely a fair question.
So it gets really complicated if you aren't viewing the TPE and that second pick as a package, because then, like you said, then you're talking, and that's what's rare about this one is normally it is that situation of like, well, what do we want this? We don't want to give you this expiring salary for like a future second. Why do we want to do that? We'll trade him for a first rounder at the deadline or something. That's how it used to be anyway. So I don't know. I think the Aaron Gordon thing, he's literally the first guy on my list of TPE options just because I think he's come up the most often and not just in relation to this. I feel like the Warriors have always been linked to him. But there's a bunch of other, not necessarily needle moving type of options unless you think the Celtics for some reason would move Marcus Smart, or you could do the James Johnson roundabout thing and try to go get Miles Turner, which is super pie in the sky. I don't know. Gordon seems like the guy to me, but I don't, Kelly Oubre, maybe you swap picks with the Suns and you do Oubre for the TPE, which I don't think you'd have to, maybe you would have to do the preliminary trade to do that. I forget exactly what Oubre means.
No, Oubre's at 14.4. So
yeah, so you're good. But like, if that's the Warriors' big offseason move, man, that's not enough. And that's kind of gets into the next thing of, can you get anything for Wiggins? And then you're packaging. You have to be talking about packaging Wiggins and the Wolves 2021.
Right.
Is that getting you Beal? I kind of doubt it. Maybe. I don't know. With a bunch of other stuff thrown in, is that getting you Holiday? I think that's a little closer. But the other thing is, well, maybe let's leave it at that. Are you? What are your thoughts on Wiggins as a trade piece and that other pick, which I think is, to me, is significantly more valuable than this year's number 2.
So I think I had you on for the trade deadline grades, and I crapped all over the Warriors making the Wiggins deal. I may have come around on it a little bit, where if it's framed as what is getting you further in trade offers right now, D'Angelo Russell and number 2 pick, or if you have Andrew Wiggins, the number 2 pick, and that Minnesota pick, I think it's the latter is going to net you more. So I'm not sure where I land on Andrew Wiggins as a trade asset specifically, other than the fact that him plus those 2 other picks is more intriguing to me than D'Angelo Russell plus the number 2 pick.
Yeah, I think that's right. I wish I could remember what I said. That sounds like something I might have said at the time, but I don't remember.
It was a lot harder to view at the time because we didn't know where the Warriors were going to end up in the lottery, and so that changes things a little bit. But I just having that Minnesota pick ends up being a big deal because I don't think they're going to be great next year when you just look at the landscape of the Western Conference. And I run counter to you though before I let you carry on with what you were going to say is I don't want them to use this pick because unless you think Anthony Edwards is the guy to bridge you into the future, I don't like the other 2 options there. You mentioned James Wiseman. A lot of people are high on him, but everyone except for Zubac that you named when talking about bigs who are back, James Wiseman doesn't profile as someone who could defend any of them, which is a problem for me. And then
nobody does though is the thing. And
right, but I don't
nobody
think
on the current
Aaron
roster.
Gordon is going to give you a better chance against Anthony Davis long term than James Wiseman would be just my counter. Like you have Draymond Green and Aaron Gordon, I think are two guys that you can throw at Anthony Davis and feel pretty good about it immediately. And so if you're looking at contending with the Lakers, like that's something you have to consider. And I'm not saying that Gordon definitely needs to be worth the number 2 pick. I think in this draft, I'm not a LaMelo guy either, so I would probably do it for an expiring contract and number 2 from Golden State. Definitely would do it if you can get number 15 from Orlando as part of that deal as well. I'm just not high on this draft. And like, even if you are a believer that LaMelo can be the bridge into the future, I don't really see how you set him up to do that on this roster when it was so difficult for you to make it work with D'Angelo Russell when you didn't even really have Steph available. And like, now you're going to have Steph available and you're going to have someone who's just worse than D'Angelo Russell because he's a rookie. So, and he's certainly more erratic than D'Angelo Russell is. Again, just looking at this stage of his career. So if Anthony Edwards is there, and you really want him, like then maybe I consider keeping it. But just looking at the other options, if you really want to use this caliber of pick, I'm sort of looking at trading down. Like, is Charlotte going to give you? I don't think they'll give you Devontae Graham to move up one spot. But would they give you Miles Bridges? Like, do you want to do something with Terry Rozier there, like where there's another step ladder scenario where it's James Johnson in number 2 for Terry Rozier and number 3? Like maybe that's something I would consider, but I'm against the Warriors using the number 2 pick unless Anthony Edwards is there and they believe he's the guy.
Yeah, see, I think I should be clear. I don't want any part of Ball or Edwards on this Warriors team particularly. And Wiseman obviously, like anytime I talk about Wiseman, I'm sort of thinking of him as if he's going to hit the 90th percentile of his potential spectrum, potential outcomes. Like the version of Wiseman that is actually incredibly nimble for his size and is just a nuclear athlete. I think that's pretty well accepted that he is just an incredible like size, speed, strength, bounce combination of guy. Like the guy, if he's just the one of the 5 best athletes at the position in the league, then I do think he is kind of not your answer, but he gives you a fighting chance against some of the bigger guys in the West. But to your point, I think trading down, or if they do trade this pick, it's kind of sneakily really important for them to get, it doesn't really matter so much where it is, but something in the, if it's not Charlotte, say like, 6 to 15 or something, because there are kind of a lot of guys that profile as 3-and-D role players. And, quietly the Warriors don't really have a lot with
none of those.
They need Wiggins to be that guy.
Yeah.
Right. Klay Thompson with the, fair amount of question marks with a major injury. And Wiggins is like alarmingly important to the team because he theoretically could be the defensive end of that. I don't know how, that's the role he's in. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that, but if they can trade down and get one of those, any number of Devin Vassell or like Patrick Williams or probably Okoro would be gone, but depending on how far they traded down. But that's huge for them because that guy's probably going to play, or you hope he can play because they're just so thin at that position.
Right, and so maybe I'm underselling James Wiseman's switchability just based off the preliminary stuff I've seen of him. There's definitely like the movement there. I would question, like, is his offensive range ever going to develop? I'm just so hesitant to even use such a top pick on a big right now. Maybe this draft class kind of justifies it, but I'm team move the pick, like move it in some form. And you mentioned it, like, if you wanted to, I would say if you want to take a swing on one of those 3-and-D guys at number 2, like if you're that gutsy, then maybe I might even support that more than just defaulting to Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, James Wiseman, or who's ever there. So it's such a complicated situation. But then the flip side of this is, how are other teams valuing the number 2 pick? Which is why I'm going to throw some trade scenarios at you, and I want to see what you think of them.
Okay.
Are you ready? Are you bracing?
I'm ready. I'm excited.
All right, so you mentioned Miles Turner already. If you can do Miles Turner and an expiring contract for number 2, who's saying no to that?
So the Warriors are getting Turner and what?
That's it.
They're getting Turner for number 2?
They're getting Turner for number 2, and then they would have to, like, let's say they turn the TPE,
the quote unquote TPE. Got it. Yeah, I do that in a heartbeat if I'm the Warriors. I don't think twice.
Would the Pacers consider that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think to me, like Turner is a way for you to try to go. I think I might be. Maybe you're with me. I don't know. I feel like Turner is super valuable, and that may be more just about thinking about him in theory than his production, which hasn't been super great. But a guy that can block shots and I think the volume hasn't really been there, but can spread the floor and shoot threes. There just aren't a lot of those guys, and I think especially with Draymond Green playing the four, your five's got to be able to space. Like that's just how it's going to have to work if the Warriors are going to be any good. I'm not sure. So if you're Indy, you're doing that to take either Ball or Edwards, whoever's still there after Minnesota picks. So you're sort of trading Turner for theoretically your lead guard of the future.
Right, and I mean they could turn around and send it elsewhere, but like they're also a team that's done a pretty good job of straddling the present with the future. Like I could see that, like you would still, I think with Brogdon there, still having Sabonis, like you can have that, like make that deal and then still be a playoff team in the Eastern Conference. And you might be able to talk yourself into saying, well, one, maybe Gogo Batadze can give you more minutes next year, or can we approximate at least, part of Turner's offense and defense for a lot cheaper on the free agency market. And I'm not saying that you could, but like what happens if you go out and you get like does the mid-level get you Serge Ibaka this year? Does it get you, can you, even Chris Boucher, like in theory, just a shot blocking machine who is shown he can space the floor a little bit. My other scenario that I was going to throw at you though would be like I don't know if it would constitute a Pacers reset because of how good they've been with whatever wings come into their system, but the money would be, and this works, it's Andrew Wiggins, number 2, the Minnesota pick, and I think Jordan Poole, Kevon Looney has to be in there. So Kevon Looney, Andrew Wiggins, number 2, the Minnesota pick for Oladipo and Miles Turner.
Ooh. I'm doing that if I'm the Warriors, just because I think Turner is so important and such a fit. And I think that, am I doing that? That's a good trade if I'm having to ask that question more than once. Are we sure Indiana wants to do that?
So that was my thing. Andrew Wiggins has 3 years and $94.8 million left on his deal. I think this package becomes a lot more palatable if you have no intention of paying Victor Oladipo the money he wants. I'm not saying Andrew Wiggins replaces him, but you look at how wings have just outperformed expectations on both ends of the floor since going to Indy. Like you look at what TJ Warren did last year. You look at what Bojan Bogdanovic did there. Even Justin Holiday, like turning into this guy who can guard backup fours. If you're confident in your program, and I know you have a new head coach now, and maybe that sort of factors into that equation where you maybe don't know how scalable that system, those principles are with having Nate, I'm going to butcher this, but Bjorkgren like there. That's a concern. So Andrew Wiggins being like this net minus of a contract, like certainly hurts you there. I would, you could throw in Golden State's own pick next year as well. Like depending on when you're timing this trade, like you could go the number 2 pick, Golden State's pick next year, and the Minnesota pick, and then for Turner and Oladipo with Wiggins and Kevon Looney. Like maybe that's something that's more palatable, but it's tough for me to escape the feeling that still kind of feels like a reset for Indy, because where does like your core is then Sabonis, Malcolm Brogdon, TJ Warren, Andrew Wiggins, and then like you have those picks. It's like, where does that really put you in the East?
I think too, Indiana is one of the most historically tax averse teams in the league. And if you, not that they'd be in it, but having Wiggins on your roster just makes everything harder, just
right.
having that salary. I think, but like, look, so you still have Sabonis, you have Brogdon, you have whoever you take at 2. And you got, I'm with you. I think that Minnesota pick could potentially be huge. Well, it might be too valuable because it might be top 3 and the protections might keep it from you. But actually forget if that converts or what it converts into. I think it might, well, I don't know. I don't want to speak on it if I'm not sure. We can look it up in a second. But I don't know. To me, Indy says no, which is kind of nuts thinking you get a number 2 and a potentially super valuable first the next year. But yeah, I don't know. From the Warriors' perspective, I mean, that solves a lot of problems. It makes them a lot deeper. It gives them another defensive wing if Oladipo is healthy, and Turner, again, is just like a perfect fit. So, yeah, I like that. I think I like that, too.
Would you do it's basically, so Andrew Wiggins and Kevon Looney and number 2 plus the Minnesota pick for Jrue Holiday and JJ Redick?
that feels like, I don't know why it feels like too much for those two guys, but not too much for Oladipo and Turner.
Well, so the thing for me would be that Jrue Holiday is probably going to be a free agent in 2021, and then JJ Redick is expiring. Yeah. And so it's like, yes, you're getting off the Wiggins contract, but to use your two best trade chips on guys who are going to be entering free agency, it feels like risky for that. And so I'm wondering, like, okay, what if they were willing to move Josh Hart in that deal? Or can you get that, like, if you remove the number, like, what's more important in New Orleans, the number 2 pick or that Minnesota pick? Like, can you get just Holiday for one of those picks and Andrew Wiggins? Like, let's remove all under Andrew Wiggins. Let's remove all other moving parts. If it's one of those picks and Andrew Wiggins for Jrue Holiday, and I think there would have to be other money involved just because Andrew Wiggins makes so much money. No, that would actually work out.
It's pretty close, though. Holiday's close enough, I think.
Yeah, but the Warriors would be saving money in that deal. So I'm assuming they'd have to take something back from New Orleans, but New Orleans isn't really close to the tax. They don't really have – they're not just going to throw in Josh Hart to save money. Maybe it's like they probably still like Nicolo Melli. So like that would work as a straight up just Holiday for one of those picks and Andrew Wiggins. I question then whether that's enough for New Orleans just because Holiday's so good. Yes, he's expiring, but that's almost preferable to having 3 years of Andrew Wiggins at $94.7 million.
Well, a lot of things are preferable to that. Like, New Orleans wasn't one of my teams, but they're really interesting because the answer. So the question you have to ask when thinking about that kind of trade is where does New Orleans think it is, in terms of its growth trajectory, and I mean obviously that affects any Holiday trade because if they think they're ready now, if they think that late season run, forget the bubble because that didn't go well. But if they think they're kind of ready to maybe be the 5th or 6th seed in the West, which is a pretty big ask, to, based on how much better the West stands to be next year, then I don't know. I think that really they're sort of where they view themselves in their development, I think matters. And like, look, this is a little bit hot takey, but to me, like, I'm pretty sure Zion Williamson's best years are going to come before he's 25. And I think after that, maybe you're in trouble. So their window, the location of their window might not be exactly where the age of their best players suggests it is, because I just don't have a lot of confidence that Zion's going to be a good late 20s player. So I don't know. Maybe that speaks to just let's hang on to Holiday and let's see what we got. But it's interesting you mentioned both of those teams, Indy and New Orleans, because I think half the time I'm looking at trades that I like from both sides. It almost always involves Turner going to the Pelicans and Holiday going back to Indiana because I want a Holiday reunion, number one.
Yeah, that needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, they got to re-sign Justin too. But also because I think Turner makes a lot of sense next to Zion.
Yeah, he makes a ton of sense there. I mean, really any stretch big just makes so much sense next to Zion.
Yeah, they should make a play for Ibaka too, come to think of it.
Yeah, he would be good. I guess even if you want to go smaller, like Millsap would work there at this point. I've even said like Chris Boucher and Zion Williams would be interesting to me. Chris Boucher is like a siren song for me. Yeah, like he's up there for me.
The wait is finally over. Football is back. You might not be at a game this year, but you can still be in on the action at BetOnline. BetOnline is going the extra mile to make sure you can get in on every possible chance to win this season. From game spreads and totals to team, player, and coaching props, BetOnline gives you more options to wager on than anywhere else. You can get in on their season opening bonuses today and start off wagering on wins, division odds, and championship futures all day, every day. Head to BetOnline today and take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses. Don't forget to use promo code BLUEWIRE, all one word, at betonline.ag. That's BLUEWIRE, all one word. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
Two more ones that are quick. We've already mentioned one of them. So if it was Aaron Gordon in number 15 for number 2, and then, again, the TPE in quotes, like we're saying you're acquiring another expiring contract that you just moved with the number 2 pick, are you doing that? Which of those two teams is saying no, if either of them?
I think New Orleans. I think Orlando does that. If I'm the Warriors, like my knee-jerk reaction is that's not enough, but I actually think that might be about as well as they can do realistically. So I think that, to me, like if you made me pick, okay, if you told me the Warriors are trading this pick and the TPE, what is the most likely outcome? I think it's probably Gordon. And that's not based on it just has the feel of, I think that makes sense from both sides, and it's sort of disappointing, I think, from the Warriors' perspective, because I suspect they have bigger ambitions than that. But I think both would do that, and I think when the dust settles, that might just be sort of as well as they can do.
Does this make it more attractive or less, Andrew Wiggins and number 2 for Gordon and Terrence Ross? And I'm not sure if number 15 would still be involved in that.
I think that makes, I don't know. That's weird. Am I about to say that like I don't want to lose Wiggins for Ross? So it's that's an interesting trade. So it's Wiggins and 2 for Gordon and Ross basically, and you're not getting a pick back.
I mean, they could in theory give up number 15, but now I'm looking at it from Orlando's perspective of like, well, they are paying Wiggins' contract.
Right, yeah. Orlando's not going to be like, we're sorry, you're not getting this pick. I don't know. I don't think Orlando does that.
If I was Orlando, I would do that in a heartbeat. I'm not going to lie.
Really? You want Wiggins on your books? Why?
Like you're fast track to nowhere anyway right now.
Well, Wiggins is like the conductor of the fast track train to nowhere. Like
but it almost kind of forces you where it's like, all right, so let Evan Fournier like age out of now. Like, don't either he opts in and then you just let him leave the following year, or he opts out and you can let him leave now. So it's like after this season, there's all of a sudden only 2 more years left on Andrew Wiggins' deal, and like in theory, Andrew Wiggins is like the wing that they've just never really had, like someone who's going to put a ton of pressure on defenses, and he could, in theory, work well with Vooch. I would at least consider it. I don't think it's a hard no for me because Aaron Gordon, people like think he's not on a value contract. I think I'm higher on him in the consensus at this point, which is just bizarre. But you have Ross, yes, is on a declining scale, but he's at above MLE money through 22, 23. If you have a chance to get number 2, where that's going to bring you a LaMelo Ball, or I guess the problem would be if it's Wiseman that you have at number 2, like they don't with Vucevic, and you have Mo Bamba, you have Kem Birch there, and even with Jonathan Isaac once he's healthy, maybe that really sort of drums down the interest a ton for Orlando. But I don't think it should be a hard no, because I feel like they need to do something seismic that kind of points them towards the future, and eating Andrew Wiggins' deal to get the number 2 pick and then maybe give up 2 guys who don't factor in to that long-term future, I would think it's at least like playable. Maybe it's, can you get Golden State's 2021 pick as well, but you're not going to get the Minnesota pick in that deal.
No, so Orlando was one of my kind of down the list teams, so we may as well just hit them real quick right now. And it's for the reasons you said. It's that like, maybe they're fine with the mediocrity treadmill, chasing the 8th seed, fast track to nowhere, or whatever you want to call it. But like, to me, I think Isaac's latest injury kind of removes the most likely path out of that for them, because there was a scenario where Isaac was going to stay healthy and be an all defensive first and second team, maybe defensive player of the year candidate for a long time. And you could play him at center. You could build a lot of interesting stuff. You could move Vucevic. There was a way out, I think, if Isaac was going to reach his peak potential. But it sucks, but I think that's just extremely unlikely now. And so now to me, Orlando is just really in a position where, Gordon is someone they could definitely move. I mean, there are very few teams to me that need to move up in the draft more than Orlando, because I do think they need to take a home run swing. Like, as you just said, if they could get Ball, at least suddenly that's interesting. Suddenly, there's a replacement for Isaac in the, faint hope of like a way out of this department. So Orlando, just because they do feel sort of ripe for a big, overhaul. I think they're one of the most interesting teams. And like, look, Terrence Ross, I think, is a contract you can trade. Fournier, if he opts in, I think you could, who knows, you could extend him, you could trade him, you could whatever. I think he probably will opt in, by the way. And then you might even start thinking about like, well, how do we get off Vucevic's deal? Is anybody interested in that? Could we give him the Cavs for Drummond and something? I mean, I don't know, but the Magic do seem kind of positioned, or at least they should be positioned to start thinking about like, we really got to make some drastic changes here.
Yeah, without Isaac for next season, it's just, if you ever thought there was going to be a peak version of yourself that could make serious waves in the East, it's just not going to be there next year.
No.
And so I'd be with you there. The last trade I have with the Warriors, not to segue us away from the Magic, this is like the most interesting one to me. Let's say the Spurs are ready to pivot into the rebuild. Are you doing number 2? And I'm just going to call it Gorgie Jang or James Johnson. So an expiring contract at number 2 for Derek White, Rudy Gay, and I feel like number 11 would need to be in there as well.
So I was hoping you'd say Derek White, because I'm on the Derek White official fan club for sure. If it was just going to be Rudy Gay, it was going to be a hard pass. But yeah, I think if I'm the Warriors, I do that. If I'm the Spurs, like it's weird. I don't know if the Spurs like value Derek White as much as a lot of people do, because it seems to me like he should be a huge focal point, and they should be kind of trying to, figure out how to maximize him.
Mm-hmm.
But it just sort of feels like a mess there, because they have Lonnie Walker and they have DeJounte Murray, who's theoretically your defense first point guard guy of the future. White could be a combo guy. And then Keldon Johnson suddenly is a thing now too. So not that he's a point guard, but he's in that. I lump those 4 guys all together in my mind. I think White would help the Warriors a ton. I think Gay, he's at a point where it's like it could just be gone this year. He's been an incredible story post Achilles and has been so much better than I thought he would be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think White is the key there. I think if you're giving me back 11, I'm doing that, because then I'm going to go get another of those kind of fungible 3-and-D guys out of this draft, and I'm feeling pretty good because I got 3 rotation players out of the deal.
And it's also what you're talking about, though, might make it less worthwhile for the Spurs, because it's like, well, is LaMelo Ball, like, you're going to loop him into like that whole mishmash of guards that are there right now? Even Anthony Edwards, where it's like the Spurs, they don't really have wings, but like they're not wanting for them right now, because do you consider Lonnie Walker a wing? DeJounte Murray's like kind of a wing, so is Keldon Johnson, but not really. So Wiseman, if he's still there at number 2, which I would assume he would be if Minnesota's the team using the number 1 pick, maybe that's value there, because they don't really have anybody unless they view Jakob Poeltl as the center of the future there, and we know LaMarcus Aldridge is not the center of the future there. So I have a tough time seeing, is Gay and Derek White like to move up 9 spots? Does that make sense for them? Is basically what it becomes.
Yeah, and I think it depends on the thing that I'm not sure about is what value are they putting on White, because if he is a guy that they view as he's a starter for us for a long time, or at least maybe he's our 6th man or something, then I don't know if that's worth it to them. But the other thing is the Spurs are sort of hard to gauge in general, because we have this perception of sort of how they've operated for 20 some odd years.
Right.
And that's going to change in a year or 2. And they're just going to be another NBA team essentially. So, I don't know if sort of the same rules are going to apply, which also like the Spurs never make trades. So that'd be the first thing I would worry about. But yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought of the Spurs as a possible trade partner. I don't know. There's a bunch of deals out there. It's just nothing's bowling you over if you're the Warriors. If it had been by now, we would have probably heard some whispers about it.
Yeah, like even trying to come up with a mega package where you trade both the Minnesota pick and this pick, it's just like, well, what does that get you? Because when you're getting to a deal that's so big, then you kind of need Andrew Wiggins in there, and he changes the complexion of the deal entirely as someone who's on a net negative contract.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Giannis was sort of like, I'm sure internally what they were hoping Wiggins and the next year's Minnesota first, and literally anything else they could throw in there. But that's just not going to happen. I don't think so.
And maybe you can entice the Wizards into giving you Bradley Beal with it would have to be other stuff with those 2 picks and Wiggins. My whole thing is, as good as Bradley Beal is he like the best fit for that roster? Because their defense is already kind of shaky. Where now you have to wonder if Klay Thompson's going to be better off guarding bigger wings post ACL injury, just because in theory, like, they'll be slower than the assignments that he's normally used to guarding, and you're not helping your defense. Like, Wiggins isn't a defender, but he's at least a body you can imagine moving around the wings. Beal is not that player, and if he's defending the way that he did this year, which is to say not at all, that sort of becomes a problem where you have post ACL Klay, and then Steph, and then Bradley Beal. Like, what does your defense look like if Draymond Green isn't playing at defensive player of the year level?
Right. Well, that's why you need James Wiseman in there to just clean up everybody's mistakes, right?
Yeah, but you're not getting Bradley Beal and having James Wiseman is the problem.
No, I know. Also, James Wiseman will not be cleaning up mistakes. He will be making them.
Yes, that's a good point as well. I can't believe I let that one slide. So you had the Warriors, which was an overlap, and then we talked about the Magic briefly. Do you have anything to add on them?
No, just that they seem ripe, as I think we both agree, for something to happen. Because they just, we would just be rehashing that. I feel like I've been stealing all the teams. Did you have a number one team that we haven't really hit yet?
Yeah, so you said you didn't have them on your list, but the Pelicans for me.
Yeah.
And I think I've probably maybe just had too much time to think about basketball, like this exact season that we're sort of in, or at least transition that we're about to make. And I'm looking at New Orleans, and I've been the advocate of like they should, re-sign Brandon Ingram, use their MLE, bring back Derek Favors, like go at it in the West. And it's sort of like, wow, they did not look good when they were in the bubble. And like I know there was all these just circumstances beyond their control, and Zion Williamson had like 8 different rookie seasons. It felt like at the same time, I'll put it this way: if you max out Brandon Ingram, that's basically with everyone else that's on your books, without deciding whether you're going to bring back Derek Favors, without deciding on Etuan Moore. I'm assuming they won't guarantee; they'll just get rid of Darius Miller. Like that's just the salary cap at this point, with the pick number 13 in there. And now looking ahead, so you're going to have to pay Jrue Holiday in 2021. He has the player option. JJ Redick is coming off the books then too. Like Lonzo Ball is extension eligible. He's going to need a new contract then. Josh Hart is going to need a new contract then. I'm sort of wondering, like, is there a danger in maxing out Andrew Wiggins now? Because it almost consigns you to competing immediately. And while you mentioned that Zion Williamson's prime might be shorter than not, I'm still just looking at it like this roster could all of a sudden be concerned with the luxury tax by 2021. And so they're interesting to me in the sense that, one, will they decide to move Jrue Holiday to pivot into sort of more of a gradual timeline? And two, might they consider something that we're not talking about? And I think most people would be like, oh, Alonzo Ball trade. My whole thing is like, would you sign and trade Brandon Ingram at this point? Like there will be teams, even the ones with cap space, because they know you could match, that might be open to doing something. Like what if you can get number 6 and Cam Reddish out of Atlanta and maybe something else too? Like, is that a move you're considering? Because yeah, Brandon Ingram was an all-star level player last year, but do you count on that moving forward? And two, what does that just mean for you in the context of the Western Conference over the next 3 to 4 years when you're like not really sure how this whole roster meshes together?
I think that's one, certainly that's one way to view it. The other way I would push back on it and frame it this way is the Pelicans kind of have a lot of good problems. Because the Holiday thing, look, I assume he's going to opt in for 21-22. So you really do.
Oh,
you got this year.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think, honestly, I think anybody that has like over 25 million that they can lock down is even like, I don't think we're going to be through the financial uncertainty, in 21-22. I think player options right now, unless you're like Jeremy Grant, if you're down around the 10 million, whatever, I think you can get out on the market and see what you can do. But if Holiday's option is 27.1 million, and he's going to be, I don't have it in front of me, but I think he's 30 now or 29.
30, yeah, turned 30 in June.
So like, yeah, you could opt out, and sign maybe like a 4-year, $110 million deal. But I don't know. So I'm viewing him more as, there's sort of less urgency to trade him because of the length of his contract, because I'm viewing it as a 2-year thing.
Okay.
And so you have that, less urgency there. I think Ingram, to me, you do max him out. I think just not just because he was an all-star or anything like that, but the specific types of gains that he made in his game this year are just the kinds that are just, they seem like not foolproof, but I think they stick. Like the ability to shoot off the dribble, the ability to add a bunch of volume to your 3-point shot. And just at his height, I feel like, the Tatum comparison is really imperfect. He's not Jason Tatum, but I think there's some of that in there. So I think you max him out. You've got Williamson on the rookie deal through 23-24. Probably you extend him before that if it looks like he's going to be healthy. I don't know. So I think first, if the question is 6 and Reddish for Ingram, or some permutation of that, no, I think I want Ingram. I'm going to lock him down, and I'll worry about moving Holiday, who I think is going to be an asset basically until the day his contract expires. So yeah, I'm just going to figure that out later.
What if Golden State is coming at you with number 2, the Minnesota pick?
if I'm getting the
and
Minnesota
another pick and Andrew Wiggins' deal. You're getting 3 picks and Andrew Wiggins for Brandon Ingram.
Oh, for Ingram? I thought you were going to talk about Holiday. Man, I don't know. You're just kind of overwhelming me with these Warriors trade options. I'm trying to stay.
That one was just one that sprang me. But I'm saying, like, I could even see Atlanta being like, hey, here's Kevin Huerter, Cam Reddish, that OKC pick in 2022, and then the number 6 pick here. Like, let's talk about an Ingram sign and trade. And then look, the Pelicans still are interesting to me. I think they keep Ingram. I want to be clear. I just have more questions about it because of how far away they appeared in the bubble. But if you're going to pay Ingram and you're going to keep Holiday, well, then you're still interesting because it's like, well, do you look at like seeing what you could get for Lonzo Ball, not just because of the money, but maybe to make the roster just a better balance? And then also in general, you're still kind of like tethered to a win-ish now window, I would say. If you're as soon as you max someone out in my books, like it's with Phoenix with Devin Booker, like the clock just starts ticking then, even if they're not an imminent flight risk because you've just invested that equity in someone. And so can they go out and make a win nowish trade? Like does them trying to enter the Bradley Beal sweepstakes if Washington even makes them available because they have all those picks from that Laker trade makes sense? Are they a team like Victor Oladipo probably isn't like the best fit there, but like a Miles Turner, that would be a perfect move. You've already talked about it. So I think they're interesting both ways because I feel like they almost have to pick one just because I feel like we're at the point where we've established, at least for the most part, that this roster as currently constructed is not going to be this quasi contender.
Yeah, in my mind, I kind of, and this might just be wishful thinking, but like, when we first started talking about them, I said that, everything kind of depends on where they think they are. And in my mind, I just unrealistically, I kind of want them to try to just do both, like let's hold on to Holiday. Let's develop our young guys. If we want to trade Ball for future assets, that's fine. But let's sort of try to nurture the young guys, keep getting, future assets and keep our vets. Like I kind of want them to try to do everything, at least for a year or two. But like to me, if you're trading Ingram, you're also trading Holiday. You're also trading Redick. Because Ingram is an all-star who theoretically is just starting his prime. And if you're going to move him, I think you're sort of tearing it down again, even they just did that. So, which feels like a little bit too much upheaval for me. But yeah, no, I don't know. I kind of want them to try to do both. Just kind of do everything. Be all things to all people. Be young and old. Be good now and later. Like let's just see if that's actually possible.
Do you want to hit me with your next team?
So can we talk about Brooklyn? I think we sort of have to talk about Brooklyn.
I think you and I, whenever we podcast, are contractually obligated to talk about Brooklyn because we invariably do.
That's right. I think, yeah. So we're probably just going to rehash things we talked about. So my first bullet point under Brooklyn Nets for my teams is, quote, just the circus of Kyrie and no experienced Nash. Like that to me puts like everything on the table for them. So the third star pursuit, which I think we've both talked about together and separately, of I'm not sure that's the best way to go. Trading all these guys that are useful starter/rotation players on really good contracts for, insert whoever, Beal, who again just keeps looking like he's not going to be moved. But of course, that's exactly what he and Washington should say to keep his value high.
Right.
The Joe Harris free agency. What's he going to get? Keeping him to me is about as important as anything else the Nets could possibly do this offseason. I just don't know what that's going to cost. And then you just have overlaying all of this, the really like quietly high stakes of you need to win now because Kevin Durant is 32. And he's going to age better than most. And even with the Achilles injury, I guess there are reports out there of like he's just looked incredible in workouts and scrimmages.
Shocking.
Yeah, right.
Shocking.
Yeah, nobody's ever said he looks a little washed. I think we should.
He put on 15 pounds of muscle in 4 weeks.
Yeah, and he got fat. He got taller too.
But they didn't list it. They're actually listing him at 6'7" now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But that's kind of that's a big deal because, like, as much as we like to think of the Durant-Irving pairing as a pairing, I mean, those guys are not on the same level. If Durant is like an all-timer, one of the best scorers ever, like this is not new information to you. He's like a separate class of basketball player. Kyrie Irving is a really good offensive player who brings a lot of difficulties, like literally everywhere else, on and off the floor. So if Durant is not, close to what he used to be for very long, then it sort of almost doesn't matter like what the Nets do, because they're not going to get this off the ground. But so those are kind of the bullet points. You could take any of those and run with, the Kyrie, Steve Nash thing, third star pursuit, Joe Harris, KD's age. What interests you most about the Nets?
The coaching collaborative. The Nets don't have a head coach.
It's a co-op. That's like a New York thing.
I think I'm most fascinated by they have to keep Joe Harris. My semi-spicy take is that if you're the Knicks, I would rather overpay Joe Harris than Fred VanVleet, because he's so plug and play that you can overpay for shooters, but like within the context of your roster where you have these ball handlers who can't shoot, Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, and then Mitchell Robinson, a big who doesn't really space the floor, like just surround them with outlets of shooting. And Joe Harris is what, you wanted Wayne Ellington to be, and he was not. So maybe the Nets don't value Joe Harris like that, because Kyrie, like when he was talking about his teammates, like Joe Harris wasn't on that list in the middle of the season. He said that didn't mean anything, and perhaps it didn't. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there, but I just don't view his free agency as an issue for them. If you have to pay him $15 million, pay him $15 million. The third star pursuit is interesting to me because they have at once one of the more interesting under the radar trade packages out there, but it's also built around players that are sort of win now when you're looking at Spencer Dinwiddie and Karis LeVert. And so, I don't know if you're giving up both of those guys in a deal. I don't know how much of an upgrade you're actually getting. And my hotter take would be, I'm not giving up Karis LeVert in a deal for Jrue Holiday. I'm not giving him up in a deal for Victor Oladipo. I consider giving him up definitely for Bradley Beal, but like that, unless you're getting a top 20 player, certified top 20, not Jrue Holiday, where in any given season maybe you could envision it, I'm just not giving up Karis LeVert. I think he just provides more value to you on that contract. And so if Dinwiddie, Allen, picks, and then another salary, Taurean Prince can get you a Jrue Holiday, if it can get you a Victor Oladipo, yes, I'm looking at that. Otherwise, though, I think the Nets might be better off standing pat or just thinking smaller scale. Do you know who's a great fit in Brooklyn? Aaron Gordon. That would be, is there a way to work that, Dinwiddie and another salary? Does that get you Aaron Gordon? That's absolutely perfect for what they need. So I think they should look at moves like that, where maybe you're not necessarily getting the third star, but you get to keep Karis LeVert. I'm not saying that he's going to be your third star, but after what he did, and he's not the most efficient player, but he can hit an off the dribble three, and he's a really good passer. And, you can at least throw him on twos and some threes defensively and not live to regret it all the time. That, it matters to me when he's, from a team perspective, on this, what I would call a value contract, 3 years and $52.5 million. If you're concerned about his health, I get it, but are you guaranteeing yourself much better health with Victor Oladipo? Not necessarily. And then even with Jrue Holiday, let's say he's not expiring. His just seems like a case of, well, he's going to opt in and then you have to extend him anyway. That's going to be the situation. So Karis LeVert has shot up in value to me. And so unless you're getting Bradley Beal or a player above, let's say James Harden becomes available and you just throw the kitchen sink at Houston. Picks, LeVert, Dinwiddie, Jared Allen. Yeah, I don't know if Houston actually considers that, and Brooklyn's defense will be just a certified disaster in that case. But that's the type of deal that I think you would have to move Karis LeVert in at that point. And I'm interested to see whether the Nets don't view it that way. Kevin Durant has said that Karis LeVert can be the Nets' third star, and I actually think that him and Karis LeVert have a pre-existing relationship. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I feel like he had mentioned this in a scrum that I was in. I can't, when he was talking about an injury. So maybe that goodwill actually means something. But then there's also this urgency in Brooklyn where it's DeAndre Jordan very clearly shouldn't have been prioritized over Jared Allen, but that's exactly what happened once Kenny Atkinson left. And so there's this, and then look at who was hired as head coach. Steve Nash is a brilliant basketball mind, but he definitely skipped the line. And this seems like it was handpicked by both Kevin Durant, who's good friends with him, and Kyrie Irving, who views this as a coaching co-op right now. And I don't have a problem with them, with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. If you want to say they're running the show or they just have this heavy influence, they're the superstars. That's why, you sign them. If that was part of the deal, that's fine. But when players take that view, I do feel like they're more short-sighted than not. And I'm not trying to criticize saying that executives are better, because executives make boneheaded decisions all the time. I could just see a scenario in which the Nets, wind up undervaluing what Karis LeVert actually is to them or what he can actually net them on the trade market. And the example would be if you move him for Victor Oladipo, I think it's a failed move.
I think that's probably right. And I may or may not have proposed exactly that in some trade piece I wrote. I can't remember. But a couple. So I've said this before. I want to talk more about LeVert because like every element of him on this team and potentially not being on this team is really interesting to me. I think what you need if you're going to be the type of team that the Nets want to be, which is to say a legitimate contender, what you need are superstars, and you also need, I probably said this on this pod before, and I think you also need a bunch of guys that are way better than the contracts that they have. So, I think Dinwiddie falls in that category. I think LeVert definitely falls in that category. I think Harris, even if he's getting $15 million, might fall in that category. So the idea that instead of having stars and a bunch of guys outperforming the contracts they're on and providing a bunch of extra surplus value for you, the idea that it's instead better to have a third superstar who necessarily on the best version of the Nets will be marginalized because you've got two guys that need the ball and deserve the ball in Irving and Durant, I think is a mistake. The problem is LeVert kind of falls into that same category because he is absolutely an on-ball guy. And the counter would be, well, Kyrie Irving never stays healthy and Durant is coming off a catastrophic injury. We don't know how durable he's going to be. So LeVert's going to be able to sort of maximize his on-ball game just fine. That's a good counter. Maybe that's how it plays out. But I do think it's fair to say that LeVert is probably not going to get to be the best version of himself on this team, and that other types of players might provide Brooklyn more value. Maybe not necessarily dollar for dollar value, because LeVert's contract is, as you mentioned, is so, just enticing. Any team should want that. Mm-hmm. But I think like, especially if, and this may or may not be the case, there have to be teams around the league that look at LeVert and kind of see and I want to be very careful about this because I'm not drawing this comparison, see like a James Harden leaving OKC kind of situation. LeVert is not Harden, but the idea
aggregators alert.
Yeah,
Karis LeVert is James Harden.
Nobody's going to aggregate me. This is way too convoluted of a point I'm making. But I think there are teams out there that would have reason to view LeVert as a guy like, we can get this guy. The Nets, I think, it's not the way that he is valuable to us is different than the way he's valuable to the Nets in a way that benefits us, because we're going to take him, we're going to put the ball in his hands. He's the top option, and he's going to get us 27 a game and 6 assists, whatever. Like, he's just going to be our guy. He's going to pop. He's going to finally stay healthy. And lo and behold, we got an all-star making $16 million a year for the next, this year and 2 more. And now we're rolling. Like, there have to be teams out, like Orlando should be one of those teams. Like, suddenly they have a guy that actually makes stuff happen offensively. Add any number of other teams that just need a guy to do that. So that, to me, I'm just arguing against myself, because there would be logic in the Nets moving him, because they could extract a lot of value from a team that views LeVert that way, and the Nets will not get that kind of production from LeVert. So I cannot wait to see what they do. And I honestly, my gut reaction again to circle back is that they should just keep him, because he's such a value on that deal and he's so good, and Dinwiddie to some extent, and Allen same way. But I'm really interested to see how this plays out, because there is a scenario where he just goes to another team and he's an all-star, and the Nets maybe, that's how they get their third star and it fits better. It's just a totally, unpredictable kind of set of outcomes laying out there, just all tied directly to LeVert and what the Nets do with him.
I'm totally with you where you could talk yourself just around yourself when discussing the Brooklyn Nets. Like, that's where they're at. But I do think they end up doing something. I don't know what it is.
You don't hire Steve Nash to be your coach. That to me is so on brand of, look how splashy this was. And like, there's no bigger Nash fan than me. Like, I hope it goes well. I don't think it's going to go well. But the Nets just seem like this is it. They're going to make noise. And the way you do that is trading for a star. So I agree. I think they're going to do something.
I do think, and I already mentioned this though, that they actually, like, their best trade packages are really good. Like, when you look at Dinwiddie, and if you want to bet, we talk about, how far into the distance are you willing to go with picks. Like, this whole thing is completely combustible. And so if you're taking a chance on, like, you get Brooklyn to throw you a loosely protected, like, 2023 first round pick, that really just, beefs up the deal a ton too. And you still have Jared Allen. Granted, you'll have to pay him before 21, 22. Like, and even just Spencer Dinwiddie, yeah, you could worry about him entering free agency in 2021, but he's a fringe all-star in the Eastern Conference. So their best trade package, though, I feel like could actually get them something special. It's just a matter of, is that someone special going to be available? And if he's not, are they going to offer close to their best and just settle anyway for the sake of doing something?
Yeah, no, they're super interesting. I'm glad we got our 20 minutes of Nets talk. I was worried we weren't going to be able to pull it off.
My next team is, and I do have some, I don't want to make it seem like we're focusing on all just like the flagship franchises, but Dallas to me is incredibly interesting because so Brian Windhorst on The Jump mentioned that the Mavericks are expected to be in the front of the line for Giannis, and we can make the joke that it's like, well, 29 other teams are saying the same thing, but like 29 other teams don't have another entrenched like top 5 player by that point who is just so young that you could just contend for championships for roughly forever. My whole thing is, because you have Luka Doncic, you're like, aren't you obligated to do something now? And I know you're not going to have cap space unless Tim Hardaway Jr. opts out, which no one expects him to, I would think, at this point. Still, like, you can explore. This is a team, when you talk about sign and trades, like, this is a team where it can make sense. They have pick number 18 that they can move after the fact. You have Seth Curry. Like, that contract is gold. Dorian Finney-Smith, gold. Delon Wright, I don't think he's a great fit for the Mavericks. I think he could be a great fit elsewhere. You have Tim Hardaway Jr. on that expiring deal as fodder. And so I'm not saying you unload everything, but like if you can get a Danilo Gallinari via sign and trade, or even a Fred VanVleet, if Toronto decides that it wants to, about face into this, I'll call it a gap year because I don't expect them to rebuild with Pascal Siakam and OG Anunoby there. Like, you can actually do some stuff, but then there's also the pull of, well, is this the summer to even do that? Because I mentioned Danilo Gallinari and Fred VanVleet, but like after them, who's worth going the sign and trade route for? There's just not a ton of options. Maybe a Joe Harris, if you could get him. He doesn't really alleviate the ball handling, but he's just, imagine him playing next to Luka Doncic. Like, just imagine that. So I understand the Mavericks want to wait, but like, we've heard this story before with them when they had Dirk and like it just didn't work out. They went after Darren Williams. They missed on him the first time. Dwight Howard, they missed on him as well. Didn't they also get a meeting with, they were like tangentially mentioned in one of the LeBron sweepstakes, I believe, and he doesn't end up there. And so there have been misses historically, and you're just, when you're betting against the field, you're probably not going to get superstar X. Like, there are just a bunch of other teams that are going to be interested in. It certainly helps that if Giannis is going to enter free agency, he's probably not going to be traded. Like, if he hasn't signed the Supermax, we know the Bucks aren't going to deal him. So that helps Dallas's case. Still, Luka Doncic is great already. Like, you were nearing a 50-win pace this season. I know there's the element of, will Kristaps Porzingis remain healthy? That works both ways. It's, well, then you should wait. But then it's like, well, no, you should probably try and get another number 2 for Doncic right now so that he's not carrying as big of a load, particularly in crunch time. I also subscribe to the theory that if you need cap space, you can always figure out a way to get it. If Giannis decides he wants to play for you, you'll figure out a way to make it happen. Like, you'll do it if he wants to play for you. So I'm not as worried about gumming up their 2021 books. And then here's the other thing. What if Giannis signs the Supermax? I don't think, my gut feeling is that he won't, but that's just a gut feeling. Let's say he does, though. Are you really waiting until 2021 because, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George have player options and LeBron has a player option? It becomes a lot less intriguing to me that summer if Giannis signs his Supermax, or it doesn't look like he's leaving Milwaukee for that matter. And so I feel like they're not necessarily obligated, but they're a team that could end up making this all-in-ish play that you wouldn't have expected them to make because the assumption is that they're trying to remain flexible for 2021.
So I'm so glad you mentioned because nobody's talked about this. The Heat are one of the teams. Dallas is another. Anytime we've heard it for months, such and such team doesn't want to do anything to tie up long-term money because they're really focused on 2021 and that free agent class. And by that free agent class, there are other it's a great year, but it's Giannis, right? Like, the Heat want Giannis. Toronto wants Giannis. Dallas wants Giannis. That's why they're, theoretically not going to tie up long-term money. But exactly as you said, if a player of that level And really, like, Giannis is going to decide where he plays. It's not like some team that he doesn't want to go to is going to trade for, it's like, that's just not how it works at that level. So when he says, hey, I want to come play in Dallas, no problem. We'll do whatever we can. Easy. We can move this money. No problem. We can attach a bunch of picks because they're not going to be worth shit anyway because we're going to be so awesome because we have Giannis and Luka. But right, like it's so easy to move that money. So this idea that we're going to keep the powder dry. We're going to no. If you're keeping the powder dry for just a general free agency pursuit, like we want to sign, a couple starters or whatever, like that's fine. But if there's this one guy and we think we have a shot at signing him, like it's a totally different situation. So yeah, I agree. They don't need to avoid signing guys because if it comes down to it, they can just do whatever they need to get rid of them and sign Giannis. But with that said, I do think that Dallas is actually, they do have all those contracts you mentioned are so team friendly. And I do think that they're positioned to, be at least as good as they were this year, which is to say like kind of not for sure contenders, but I mean, they're close. And if you price,
they kind of feel like they're between 0.5 and 1.5 players away, if that makes any sense, which is pretty damn close.
They're really close. And so that might just be, I don't know, somebody gets a couple guys get a little bit better and suddenly you've made up that 0.5 to 1.5 player gap and you get a little lucky and, they could be in the conference finals if they don't do anything. Like that wouldn't be remotely surprising next year. So, just going out willy nilly and just, Luka's great now. We gotta maximize this roster. I do think you have to at least balance that against, let's make sure we're keeping, the first thing here, which is getting Giannis. And like you said, they probably aren't going to get him just because you always take the field, especially when Dallas is involved, because their history is they just don't seem to measure up to other teams in free agency. But yeah, I'm glad you made that point. That was something I was going to bring up, this idea of let's keep the books clear, because that just to me is totally just misses the point of like how big name players actually end up on teams that they want to play for.
And I will say I like the idea of Fred VanVleet in Dallas a great deal, just because he doesn't hurt your defense. If anything, he's going to help it. Where Dallas not going to help you get stops, even though I think that he could be exactly what you need as well. But if you can work, if Toronto's just like, well, we don't want to pay VanVleet, between $18 and $23 million a year, like whatever it ends up being, I feel like there are some sign and trade scenarios there, and he feels like he would be the perfect fit for Dallas. And it's, look, like you said, at this level, I don't think with Giannis, you don't need to worry about having cap space in advance. You'll figure out a way to get it if he wants to play for your team.
Can we? I want to do one more. I don't know if not the flagship teams. This is one I wanted to get to. Are you done? Are you done on Dallas? You got anything else on them?
No, nothing else on them.
So let's talk about the Nuggets. And so for me, like looking at trades and like where could Oladipo wind up, or where could Jrue Holiday, or where could Beal end up? To like. You just, look, and I know that I think it was today or yesterday, there was a report about the Nuggets have said, like, don't even ask about Michael Porter Jr., like off the table, just no way. Which again, same thing with the Wizards and Beal, like, of course you say that. Like that's how you keep a player's value high and you make teams make dumber offers than they otherwise would. But you just have Porter Jr. and the Gary Harris contract and some filler, and like suddenly Denver is in play for absolutely anybody that is possibly going to be moved. And basically, if you're replacing Gary Harris, who just, seemed like a huge value when he signed that contract a few years ago and then was borderline unplayable for like the last year plus of it, partly because of injury. But like if you upgrade Gary Harris in that rotation with someone like the best version of Oladipo or Holiday or Beal, like now we're really talking about something with the Nuggets. And I get it that Porter Jr. is kind of a lottery ticket and looked so good, but like if this is going to get you over the top right now, which maybe those guys would, Denver to me is kind of this sneaky, sensible landing spot for like almost any of these guards and wings that could potentially be on offer. And that's to say nothing of the Jeremy Grant player option situation, Paul Millsap's future with the team or non-future, depending on, what shakes out there. But Denver, I think, has a potentially very interesting offseason, depending on how aggressive it wants to get.
Yeah, I'm with you. I give up MPJ if it's for Beal. I don't give him up for Oladipo. I'm on the fence about Jrue Holiday. Like, can you get? It feels like you would need to get Josh Hart back in that deal as well for me. But it's also complicated by the fact that Gary Harris is a great salary filler, but he's not really on his contract isn't considered positive value anymore. And if you're Denver, you don't have like these other top notch picks to just throw in there, or even prospects. Like, yeah, Bull is kind of novel at this point. That's fine, but your own future picks are not going to be worth all that much to other teams. And so it feels like if you want to acquire that swing piece, you almost have to include MPJ, because I'm like trying to rack my brain for, what is Gary Harris and just what are going to end up being low to mid end picks. Like, where, as that is a framework, like where does that get you? Maybe it's enough to get your Oladipo, in which case I would rather do that. And then you could still hang on to MPJ. But if you want to make the leap that it's going to take to keep pace with the Lakers and the Clippers, if you want to throw the Rockets in there, fine. Or even just to fend off the up-and-comers like the Pelicans, maybe like the Suns. It's something that you're absolutely going to have to consider. And look, teams were worried about his injury history before he was drafted. And maybe you have to read into the fact that he was talking about or hinting at, even a little bit in the playoffs, not getting enough shots at some point. And then you also just don't have necessarily maybe during the regular season you could play him more. You definitely could. But do you have the stomach for his learning curve on defense? There are like nights where it looks like he's going to be a pretty good help defender, and then there are nights where he just looks lost. I know that's part of the youngster experience, but if you're Denver and you don't have you just don't have lockdown defense to begin with, and you could lose Paul Millsap, you could in theory lose Jeremy Grant this offseason. It won't necessarily get easier to navigate the minutes with MPJ on the floor either.
Yeah, so I think any deal depends on. So obviously, I think this might sound crazy like 3 years from now if he's made 2 All-Star games and has a scoring title by then. But like, I think you might be you're selling high on Porter Jr. because of the breakout in the bubble. And no Gary Harris deal happened. Like, MPJ is the deal. Like, that's why a team, with a veteran that it's looking to move would even consider this. Mm-hmm. And they'd have to believe that this guy is going to be our leading scorer, or at the very least, like an awesome number 2 option that will A, stay healthy, and B, continue to be like mostly not terrible on defense, the majority of the time. I do think, I actually, so I think we agree that Beal is just, the average 30 a game. He's he's probably at the top of the list of guys you could get. But if you do bring Grant back and you have Jrue Holiday, that's 40% of your starting 5 that's like pretty nasty defensively. And I think, depending on, if you have Torrey Craig in there, who actually I think he's also a free agent, so, not exactly high on the list of fascinating Denver options, but, you can get away with having to sort of change your schemes every other quarter to make sure Jokic isn't getting, used the wrong way in a playoff series. So to me, if I don't know if the Pelicans would have any interest, but if you're just starting of Porter Jr., Harris, and maybe you have to throw in one of their unimpressive picks for Holiday. I mean, maybe Porter Jr. and Ingram are a little like there's some overlap there, but that's a starting point, at least for me. And I think Holiday makes a ton of sense, just specifically him in Denver.
And look, the upside of selling high on MPJ because of what he did in the bubble is maybe you don't have to include that extra asset to do it, where it's just, I think Harris and Porter Jr. get you there financially for Jrue Holiday. If it doesn't, you have, you're not going to want to give up Monte Morris in that deal, but they do not have just like these expendable contracts. You don't want to give up Will Barton. Keita Bates-Diop would be, not guaranteed that you could throw him in there. So like that, maybe that's one of the benefits, is that you don't have to include all this other stuff with MPJ. Like, he's just the framework. I will say though, if you get rid of Gary Harris, like, I don't know that Jrue Holiday's probably not worse equipped to defend wings. Maybe he's a little bit better, but like, you're not like, that's where you get into this, what you're giving up, like how much are you actually replacing? Like, yeah, you get more shot creation from Jrue Holiday, but like, you've lost Gary Harris's defense as well. It feels like you've almost rolled the functionality of MPJ and Gary Harris into one player. And I don't know how much that actually does for you, which is why Denver's in such a weird spot. It feels like it needs to look for an opportunity to where they don't have to play their best chips at once, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I just would say I think Holiday is a
I would do it.
major
Yeah.
upgrade on Harris defensively specifically. I think you can use Holiday to guard. You know, you look when in the he guards Kevin Durant like that. Like he not that's partly because the Pelicans just didn't have a better option. But Holiday, I think you can get away with on a lot of all but the biggest wings. I think would be doable for him. And maybe more switchable even than Harris if you're having him chase around small guys. But yeah, no, I don't know. That's my Denver spiel, which I think is also helpful because it's another non coastal huge market team. So
I had two non-huge market teams next to each other because it feels like they're even though they're not the same team, but they're in different conferences, and it feels like they're in the same situation. I have Atlanta and Phoenix because it's like Atlanta's record doesn't show it. They weren't in the bubble to have that magical 8-0 run like Phoenix did. But these feel like two teams that are the ones that are going to be looking to make the biggest leaps in their conferences among the lottery teams or the clearly what you might have considered rebuilding teams or the clearly non-playoff teams entering last season. And I'll start with Atlanta. Just they have the most cap space in the league. They can easily get to 40 plus million. I know this isn't the summer to spend it, but like if you come out of this and you've maybe you've drummed up the price on like some restricted free agents, but like if you can get a Joe Harris out of this offseason, they were the worst 3-point shooting team in the league last year. That ends up being just an absolutely huge deal. Can you even get in the mix for like a Marcus Morris? Can you get him out of LA because of the money you have? Like there are things that they could do, or maybe they're giving out these huge 1-year deals that players might even want to accept. And then the other thing kind of staring them in the face is that they're primed to make a trade if they want. They have the cap space to do those lopsided deals. They also have Dwayne Dedman's salary if you want to get into salary matching. John Collins is extension eligible. You traded for Clint Capella already. Those two fit on offense, but I feel like there's overlap on defense just in the sense of where you might want to hide Collins in certain instances.
Yeah.
So are you willing to move Collins? And you have the number 6 pick. You have the OKC 2022 pick. You have your future picks. You have DeAndre Hunter. You have Kevin Huerter. You have Cam Reddish. Like they could do some things like where you spend a ton of money in free agency and then just turn around and trade for a marquee-ish name as well. And I'm not saying they're going to go out there and get Bradley Beal. That would be, that's not really going to help their defense, but they're not talked about as a Jrue Holiday destination, and he would be absolutely perfect for them. Maybe they're one of the teams that's willing to buy medium, we'll say, on Victor Oladipo. He absolutely works there. So I just feel like they're a team that's set up to do some stuff. I don't know what it is, but if someone's going to make a splash in free agency, they're like sort of it for me. I'm like the non-sign and trade splash, I'll say, just because they have so much cap space. And unlike Charlotte, unlike Detroit, unlike even New York, I feel like Atlanta has the incentive, or is at least looking to win now more so than people are really talking about. Whether that's within reach is a different story, but I feel like that's their mindset. And then you could, of course, throw Miami in there, but I view them as a non-cap space team at this point because I just assume that they're going to try and float these bloated 1-year deals toward Dragic and Jay Crowder.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I totally agree lumping them and the Suns together, but it's kind of shitty timing for the Hawks because they are. I think it's pretty clear that they're going to try to make the playoffs this year, and they in a vacuum have the room and have the assets to do. Like Dwayne Dedman is essentially an expiring contract because he's partially guaranteed on 21-22 salary. That's $13 million you could use to, not that they have to do this because they have all that cap space to take in lopsided trades, but like they even have that. They even have that salary to throw out there to another team. It's just like I don't see who in free agency specifically that they could realistically get that would make it sort of worth their while to burn through all these assets and flexibility. So what you said about a bunch of 1-year deals where you just overpay guys, I think that actually, which is weird to think about because the Hawks I think of them as a young team still, like they're really in position to do that. And actually, as I think about it more now, there might be a market for a lot of guys that, Atlanta, going to Atlanta is not the same as, well, I'm just going to take the Knicks cap space or, I'm going to sign there. I'm going to, Charlotte or Detroit or whatever, these other teams that have a little bit to spend. Atlanta, I think, is probably regarded fairly highly among NBA players as like a decent place to be. And they're going to try to make the playoffs. They have Trae Young. That's interesting. Clint Capella adds like stability in the middle. Collins can play. They might be in a good spot to just spend hopefully not lock it up for next year, even though we just spent a bunch of time talking about like, don't try to keep your powder dry because that's not a thing. But I think they're in a situation where it's almost unfortunate that they have all these avenues to add talent in this particular offseason because the talent just like is in shorter supply than it typically is. But yeah, they're pretty interesting. I will be curious to see if my gut says that they just aren't going to be able to go sign like Van Vliet doesn't make sense really. I don't think, or maybe he does. I don't know.
I think he does. I mean, you're small in the backcourt then, but he's definitely ball handling relief from Trae Young. But we've seen him play alongside Kyle Lowry, who's clearly a better defender. But like he can guard either the one or the two.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Like Phoenix is always the hey, where like everybody from Van Vliet to like Chris Paul. It's like would be a good spot for him. Phoenix. It's actually kind of true of Atlanta too. They really are very much linked, those two teams.
Atlanta can basically take Chris Paul into cap space too,
right?
If they really wanted to.
I mean, that makes less than 0 sense for them, but like that, they could definitely do that. Yeah, I don't know. The Suns, to pivot a little bit, I think just like the Hawks, and especially with this sort of fuel now from the bubble performance, they could really get some interesting stuff done with Kelly Oubre's contract if they wanted to throw him in. I think, what do they have, the 10th pick?
Yep.
And they have some cap space, could get more if they renounce their holds on, I think it's Baines and Saric both. So they have a lot of avenues too. And, I wonder, what do you think? All things being equal, if you're a free agent and either the Suns or the Hawks come to you and say, like, here's this balloon deal, or that's probably much less possible for the Suns than the Hawks, but where are you more interested in playing of those two teams if you're a free agent?
I think Atlanta, just because there's a clear path to the playoffs for them. And they might even be the clearly inferior team to Phoenix, but the West is just, I mean, who are you bumping from the playoff picture that made it this year? Maybe we'll assume OKC, but after that, who are you bumping? And
yeah, that's it.
You still have, San Antonio might still be there, but more importantly, there's going to be Portland and New Orleans are going to be right there on top of Phoenix, and then Golden State is coming back as well.
And Memphis. I mean, that's a possibility. They're going to be there or potentially a little bit better too.
I actually think they're going to be worse. I think they were smart in the sense, I'm not sure how the Justice Winslow trade will pan out, but I like that they kind of got rid of their cap space in that way because it prevents them from reading too much into the season. I think that they're going to find they're further away than they're supposed to be. And maybe I'll just be clearly wrong. Perhaps Brandon Clark and Jaren Jackson Jr. and John Moran are just monstrous, but they seem to be missing like 2 to 3 big pieces for me to view them as this major threat in the Western Conference.
Well, it may be a situation too where they actually get better, but it doesn't show because all the other teams around them got so much better too, and they end up looking worse. I feel like that happens. There's always a team like that every year that got better, but you couldn't tell.
Yeah, that's true. Really quickly before I let you go, the other team that I had on my list, I'm not sure if you had any other teams there, was Toronto as well, just because we kind of talked about this already, but you have Ibaka, Gasol, and Chris Boucher, my guy, they're free agents, and then Fred VanVleet's a free agent as well, and it's like they were just one win away from the Eastern Conference Finals. I could see their offseason going in so many different directions where it's, hey, let's try and balloon payment these guys for a year and just run it back. Do we keep only one of those 3, 2 of those 3, none of those 3? What happens if you keep none of those 3? Like, are you looking at offers for Kyle Lowry? You have cap space then. Are you looking to spend it on anyone? Who are you going to spend it on in this offseason? If you bring everybody back, like, well, you still might have access to your mid-level exception. Who are you going to use that on? But wait, you want to conserve 2021 cap space as well. Is that going to prevent you from adding anybody? And they're not really set up to make any big buy now trades, I would say, because you would have to give up Anunoby and I guess future picks, and then you're just not stocked with salary fodder outside of Norman Powell. But just the sheer number of free agents they have and the breadth of different ways in which their offseason could play out, it really just intrigues me. And I a lot of people, when they talk about Kyle Lowry, they assume it was the same thing last summer. Not everyone, but there were a ton of people that thought the Raptors weren't going to go for it, and they just still feel like a team to me that, regardless of what happens with their free agents, that they're still going to try to go for it next season.
Yeah, I think what is probably going to happen is they're going to kind of toe the line. I think my gut is that VanVleet will be back. I think they'll pay what it takes to keep him. It sounds like Gasol is going to be gone, but I don't know how much that actually matters, just based on how he looked towards the end for them. Like, pretty close to unplayable if he's not going to be making perimeter shots, and he wasn't. I think Ibaka is actually maybe the most telltale piece in all that, because if they bring him back on, I don't know what the number would be, but if it's for more than, if it's say like a 3-year deal, then I think they're just going to kind of let's keep who we've got. Let's organically ride this out, and then maybe as soon as Lowry's deal is up in a year, it'll be Siakam and Anunoby and Van Fleet just kind of transition into the sort of next core of this team, even though to a large extent they sort of already are. But and then they'll just kind of diminish the roles of the aging guys, and just kind of, it'll be sort of a natural transition. But I do think there's a possibility that, they're going to look at this and say, well, we got Siakam, we got him, locked in. Anunoby, I think, is a big time keeper. Van Fleet is there. But everybody else, maybe it's time to start looking at how we can get on the timeline of those other 3 guys. And not that Van Fleet or Siakam are particularly young, but they're certainly younger than, the Ibaka, Lowry, Gasol core. So I don't think I'm going to keep coming back to, like, man, could you imagine Kyle Lowry on some other, like, what he could do, just like how much he would help. But I think it's going to be like a gentle transition. I think that'll take a couple years, and before you'll wake up in 2022 and it'll just be the young guys, and everybody else will kind of just have naturally gone away.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of with you. The actual final thing I was going to say when we were talking about the Suns is, do you see, if they go to the lengths to create cap space, like, who makes sense for them? I know you kind of mentioned Fred VanVleet, but I think if you have Rubio and Booker already on your books, I don't know how much sense that actually makes. And then, like, I know Jeremy Grant's been popular. I guess I have a tough time believing that Jeremy Grant's going to leave Denver. Just, they gave up the first round pick to get him, and he's the guy they used to defend Kawhi and LeBron, and they don't have anyone to replace that. And so this is, you talk about Atlanta. In a way, this is the offseason for a team like them to have all these tools, because a lot of other teams don't. But then when you look at the pool of talent available, it's not. And Phoenix is sort of in a similar boat.
I agree. I would say the same thing. I think Van Fleet is the obvious one. And I think you would have to assume that they would move Rubio somehow. I'm not really sure where Rubio fits or makes sense. I think he makes a lot of sense in Phoenix, honestly. But Van Fleet, would be, I think, an upgrade. I don't know. I think, to me, the one of the more likely things is they use Oubre and that 10th pick and see if they could hit the lottery, and now you got Ayton, Booker, and some unlikely, from this draft anyway, other cornerstone. I think that's a possibility. But yeah, their space, we talk about, like, they're definitely going to have it, but there is a case to be made. You just bring Baines and Saric back, and you sort
particularly
of,
with the way Saric played off the bench in the bubble. Yeah.
I think maybe you just go that route. And if but if Van Fleet's, if he's saying, hey, I want to come, then I think you reevaluate. But yeah, same as Atlanta, like, they're positioned well relative to the rest of the league, except that, like, there's just not enough talent out there that makes a lot of sense for them.
Do you do Kelly Oubre Jr. and number 10 for Aaron Gordon and number 15?
How much better is Aaron Gordon than Kelly Oubre? Like, I mean, a little bit.
I think there are some people that argue he might be a downgrade from them, but I like what Gordon does defensively. You'd be banking on, because you have Ayton there and Rubio there, is Gordon going to hit enough of his threes for it to be a fit? But I also feel like you could say the same thing about Kelly Oubre Jr. a little bit. And Gordon can give you some backup minutes at the 5 when Ayton's not on the court. I actually really I've been a very big proponent of, I think that Gordon would be a great fit in Phoenix, and that's been met with, from many people, with disdain. So I will say that.
No, I don't. I have no disdain for that. I just feel like, I think, you know what? I think Gordon is a significantly better player than Oubre. He's different. And I think what you're saying is, like, you need the right version of Gordon, who is kind of doing less, trying to be like an on-ball scoring type of threat, which, if you have Devin Booker on your team, I think it'd be...
And Rubio too, even. Like, he really just hasn't played with these... there's Vooch, who's your number one option, but he hasn't played with a wing or even a guard who really commands the floor. Markelle Fultz might be the closest he's come, or Evan Fournier, like one of those two.
Yeah.
And so like they've tried to groom him as a wing, I feel like, out of necessity. And where in Phoenix they don't need him to be that type of player. And look, the passing that he showed this year in Orlando, like, yeah, that could be a help. But I really, for some reason, just looking at what he can do defensively, he shot a little bit better on his catch and shoot threes toward the latter half of this year. I just feel like Phoenix could end up being a really good fit for him. And I think even if you think Kelly Oubre Jr. is better right now, which is fine, Gordon would be the higher upside play for me just because of what he does for the Suns defensively compared to Kelly Oubre.
If you looked at like the Google Analytics of players mentioned in trade speculation, would Aaron Gordon be like, he's probably behind Beal and Holiday and Oladipo now, but I think Gordon's the top 5. I think every team is going to be like, they could talk themselves into him like being the missing piece, or at least like the starter that really fills a bunch of needs. I feel like he fits almost anywhere, especially because his salary is very reasonable.
Right, but he's also like the level of divisive that Bradley Beal definitely isn't, and maybe Oladipo's there, but like you still say, oh, we know he's an all-star level player. You don't know that about Gordon. And then there are some people who might say, they're the two sides of the fence. Oh, 2 years and $34.5 million on a declining scale. Like, that's fantastic. And then other people are like, oh, 2 years and $34.5 million for someone who might not be a top 75 player in any given season. Is that really worth it? And so there's like that element of division there that doesn't necessarily exist for many of the other most popular trade speculation targets.
Hey, I have one last question. I have one team we haven't talked about at all. And you don't need to give a long, serious answer, but are the Rockets going to blow everything up and just like completely destroy this team and trade James Harden and try to trade Russell Westbrook and just, strip it down? Like, there's a non-zero chance that happens, right? Not likely, but like there's a scenario where like Mike D'Antoni doesn't walk and Daryl Morey doesn't walk if they've been given assurances that we're going to continue to spend way into the tax and keep building a winner and keep being creative and trying to build this roster out, right? Like,
I feel like it's going to happen, but not until next season, unless things just combust by the trade deadline and then James Harden and Russell Westbrook both just want out. Because I don't know what the pathway to them actually blowing it up is. Like, you can move Tucker, you can move Covington, and you could definitely move Harden. I guess that constitutes blowing it up, but I don't know that you could move Russ. And if he's healthy, like, that's the pathway to mediocrity in the West. And for what it's worth, Tillman Fertitta said on CNBC the day that we're recording this, there's no reason to blow up our roster. This is still our window the next couple of years. James and Russell are in their early 30s. We're not blowing up anything. We plan on contending. We're going to do whatever we have to win. We can now cut to them miraculously missing the luxury tax by like 37 cents or something.
Exactly.
Like that.
And you know what I value more than the owner who's ducked the tax like from the second he took the job is Daryl Morey being like, fuck this.
I know he says that it was to spend more time with his family. And there might have been the Hong Kong element to this, where I really do believe that this probably had to be a tough year for him, just finding out like the response to the NBA, and then knowing he cost his boss in the league all that money for effectively saying the right thing, which is just such a weird thing to think about. At the same time, it's like from the moment that Russell Westbrook trade was made, something just felt askew in Houston.
That's not a Morey trade. That's not a Daryl Morey trade. No way.
No, none. And so and even if you think that he eventually would have made the Clint Capella trade, like that's a different conversation. Where do you think the Rockets would have eventually gotten a micro ball if Russell Westbrook wasn't there? I honestly don't know. But like the CP3 and Westbrook decision, like that didn't feel like Morey at all. And from that moment, unless it was just that pairing, Westbrook and Harden was spectacular beyond expectation. It sort of felt like the infrastructure in Houston was the days there were numbered. And I think even with the Mike D'Antoni negotiation, where it was just known all season that he wasn't going to be back, essentially, I don't know what that says, that you lost two of the primary, I don't want to say architects of your team, but like the forefathers of the way that you were wanting to play. Like this team was built in their image before this season, and now they're both just gone. And so I wouldn't rule anything out. I just think that I think Tillman Fertitta probably thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and that they're going to at least try and get by a season before they make that decision. Again, the caveat would be, does James Harden get frustrated at all? And I don't know if he can or will, because he had to be one of the proponents of that Russell Westbrook trade. I don't think that gets done if it's
100%.
It doesn't get done if it's just, Fertitta saying that Chris Paul's contract is one of the worst he's ever seen, which is just, look, you don't have to like the Chris Paul contract, but that is objectively dumb.
Yeah. No, I think a couple things. Just giving up, if it was the cost of getting Westbrook, fine. But I do suspect that Sam Presti, much like he did with the Paul George situation, probably knew that Harden was like, hey, you got to go get Russ, full stop. And Presti's like, oh, interesting. I'm going to extract a bunch of extra picks out of this. I think that anytime a GM is trading picks that are like significant assets a little ways down the line, like Houston did, it's always just, it's so easy to think like, well, he doesn't care. He's not going to be there. Right. Like, I think, it's just a different way of saying what you said, is that the writing, I think, was on the wall, and now it's just nothing remotely surprising. So I do think that when you put it all together, you've got Westbrook, whose contract is already terrible and will just only get worse and age, and an owner who does not want to pay the tax, and a highly respected coach and executive that walk. I just think that the elements for a very bleak future are in place. And I think you're probably right that you've got Harden, still, I think fair to say, in his prime or close enough to it as to make no difference. That the nuclear explosion may not be this season, but like, it's coming. Harden is not going to end his career in Houston, I don't think. That's going to come to an end at some point, and it'll probably be as part of a broader, just total teardown, which there's no other way. Scenarios like this don't end any other way when you've got these massive contracts and a bunch of unrest in the front office and that type of thing. So unrest is the wrong word, but you get what I mean.
Yeah, look, let's not forget about the Eric Gordon extension either. 4 years, $75.6 million. Only 3 years and $54.7 million that are guaranteed, but that did not look like the best decision at the time either for the team's long-term future, and it just gave off the vibes of, oh, they did that, they threw away all these first-round picks. I don't think Morey is planning on being there by 2022, and lo and behold, here we are.
Yep, 100%.
Grant, this was a fantastic nearly 2 hours of basketball discussion. Thank you for giving me so much of your time. I kept you for roughly double the amount of time that I thought I was going to, so the normal amount of time, I guess we could call it. Everyone, please remember to not only rate, review, and subscribe to us on iTunes and wherever else you get your podcasts if you haven't already, but also to follow Grant on Twitter at GT_Hughes. Grant, thank you so much again for doing this, and as always, you can rest assured that I will be pestering you again in the not-so-distant future.
Looking forward to it.